Sunflower Nation, thank you again for joining us this week. We have a special guest with us, Alison Berrios-Murray. She is a phenomenal woman, and I am blessed to have her in my life. So please welcome Alison. Thank you again for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Oh, of course. So, Alison, tell us a little bit about what you do right now. How would you describe your life now? What is your role or your multiple roles, rather?
Okay, so as of now, I'm like everyone else, right? Scratching to survive. I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm also a homeschooling mother, I'm an entrepreneur, and I also work part-time. So there are a lot of roles that I carry, and by the grace of God, I just depend on Him to help me do them well, or at least as best as I possibly can.
That's a lot, right? Especially homeschooling. That in itself could be an episode talking about how you made that decision to homeschool your child. So, you're a mom of how many?
Four, but my youngest is 12 and the other three are all adult men. So they're 20, 23, and 25, which makes things a lot easier. But our eldest and our middle still live at home. So it makes for an interesting household. It really does because you still have the, young ones, you still have the 20-year-old who's just about being an adult and still thinks that he can do what he wants to do and he learns the hard way that he can't. And then I have my eldest who's been with me forever and he's high functioning Asperger's. So he will always be with us. Like my husband and I made the decision that he will always live with us because he can't live on his own and we definitely will not place him in an institution.
Okay, good parenting. I love it. And I
Thank
love that you and your husband made that decision together.
you. We see
So,
that are like he still needs us.
so
Intelligent.
why did you decide to homeschool your 12-year-old?
Uh, well, that is actually an interesting event that happened. I don't want to call it a story because it's something that actually happened, right? So, in our instance, we sad enough lived around the corner from the school. We thought it was really great, and we went for orientation. Now, keep in mind, our son is half Black, half Hispanic. And we went for orientation, and they thought it would be a good idea to allow the students to go with the teacher they're going to go with in the fall. So he went with her, and we just sat in orientation and listened to all the things that they wanted to inform us about. When they brought the children back, about 30 minutes later, he's 5 going on 6. I'm sorry, he's 6 going on 7 because of his birthday. And I asked teacher, how did he do? And she said, did he has he ever been in any formalized setting? And I said, what do you mean formalized setting? She said, like a preschool daycare. And I said, no, he hasn't. She said, oh, I can tell. And I was taken aback and I was trying to figure out what does she mean. And then and I said, can you give me a little information? Like what exactly are you getting at? And she said, well, he wasn't listening to instruction and he was trying to make it about him. And I was thinking to myself, what is wrong with someone? And I said, okay, thank you. And I knew right there that something happened. So I went to the teacher assistant who was in the court class with him and actually walked back with him. And she gave me a completely different, feedback. And she said he was fine. Um, and like I know my son, but I don't know you. So I won't allow you to tell me something different about my child. And it was just a nightmare. So my husband and I said, you know what, we don't want her to be his teacher come September. So let's go to the principal now, tell him that we're not happy. We prefer that once fall comes, he'll be with someone else. And in that setting, something happened was so strange. He was disinterested, he was making faces, and this is the principal, a gentleman who was, in leadership of the school. And then as our son was sitting, the weirdest thing happened. Our son was sitting on his desk, one of his portraits fell off the wall and cut our son on his face. He didn't get ice. He didn't get the nurse. He didn't say, let's walk to the nurse's office. He didn't fill out an incident report. So I knew right there, this is definitely not the school. I went to the superintendent to try to fix the problem. And he was just like not helpful either. So I said, you know something, this is a 3-tier approach. We had the teacher, the principal, and the superintendent. And in this, we already know that beside the fact that we lived in a really good school district, I won't say what it is, because we still have a lot of contacts there. it just wasn't going to work. And not to mention the cringy part that you as a Black mother can appreciate. He had the nerve to say, "Oh, can I touch your son's hair?" And before I could say no,
Principal said that?
the principal, like he was trying to console our son, and before I could say no, he already had his hands in our son's hair. Like it was a novelty for him. And I was like, yeah, definitely we're gonna homeschool because I did it with my older boys when we lived in New York City. So I said, no, we're not sending him here.
Wow,
And we never
wow.
looked
And
at.
it's funny because a lot of us move out to the suburbs. We think we're in Jersey, so the schools are going to be great. But that all comes with its own hiccups, right? And it's funny that you mentioned the hair thing because my son also has very curly hair. And that was a major issue that he faced, I would say, from kindergarten till about fourth grade when he finally got up the nerve to be like, stop touching my hair. And at one point, they were even calling him Fluffy. That was his nickname. And the teachers would call him Fluffy. And again, it's kind of like, we got to do better. We got to do better. We have to do better. First off, with just respecting boundaries of space, but also just educating each other or ourselves on other cultures.
What's
So,
acceptable, what's not acceptable. I mean, you can admire it, assuming that that's what he was doing, but when you come to the point where you want, what is this fascination you feel it's appropriate to place your hands on our child without consent, without me even getting the opportunity to speak, you already feel like it's like, oh my gosh, like it's something you've never seen before.
so you said you homeschooled all of your boys then,
We
the
homeschooled
older
our
ones
other
as
boys
well?
for a few years, so they were in public school. And then when we moved to Jamaica, Queens, it wasn't appropriate for us to go back and forth. Our schools were in Manhattan and they were experiencing really rough situations. So we pulled them out and we homeschooled then. And that was tough with three at the same time, different grades, different ages, different learning styles. And then we placed them back once we moved to New Jersey. We lived in Palisades Park first. And it was a decent transition. It wasn't, like grand, they had to get accustomed to a lot of things because they were homeschooled for about 2.5, 3 years. But they made it and they've done well. They've done really, really well.
Good, good. I'm so happy for that.
Thank
A
God.
lot of times people have this assumption about kids who are homeschooled are kind of socially awkward or they don't know how to interact with other kids. How would you describe your son's personality? Because he's been
Um,
homeschooled his whole life, right? You said from six
he
till
is.
now, and he's 12.
He is. He does extremely well. He does better with adults because he's constantly around adults. To earn a house, even before a 23-year-old moved out, he's always been the baby. And he's constantly surrounded by, family members. And, we're all, over of a certain age. And he'll, even when we go to the park, he'll speak to the adults. The adults are very complimentary. Oh my gosh, this is your son. And I'm like, yes. And they're like, oh, he's so polite, he's so kind. He's like a little leader. He's gone with me to work when I work at my part-time job, which I work with children, and the parents love and adore him. He doesn't struggle. He does really well online. He has his own YouTube channel. He's surpassed 500 followers. He wants to, be monetized, but for him, it's about getting in a world where he's comfortable. He's not a toy child. He's more of a scientist, engineer, want to know how things work child. He's constantly on YouTube watching like all these gentlemen who work on things I would never even think of, like turning a styrofoam cup into cinnamon. Like he's into all of those things, and it's paying off. He loves it. He loves
Good,
it.
good.
He's
So
cool.
tell us about your upbringing and your childhood, right? You have these four amazing young men that you have raised. Did you learn your parenting style from your own parents? Tell us about your upbringing.
Actually, no, not at all. I actually was raised with my mother and her female partner, and up until for about a year because my mother went to prison. Mother went to prison, so I stayed with my great grandmother for 1 year in Camden, New Jersey. And my mother got released. I went back to my mother and her partner, and due to the nature of the crime, she basically had to leave the area. So we moved to Harlem, and that's where I was raised since I was 4. My mother was very into the street life, the drug life. I know she had her own traumas, which she personally never dealt with, and it carried on to her parenting style. I have and had a closer relationship with her partner than her. She would even try to say to her, "Hey, this is not how you discipline, why don't you try this?" So it was very interesting to see and experience both. I didn't learn who my father was till I was about 16, 17, and I met him for the first time on a trip to visit him in prison because he also was incarcerated. So my childhood has been very, very interesting. I have a friend that I made when I moved to Harlem. We lived in the same building, and she said it recently, and it made sense when she said it, but I never thought about it that we basically helped raise one another because our parents were into the street life. They would drink, they would use drugs. I always had clothes, I always had, clean room, I always had food, but you know, um, everything else was missing. I didn't have a spiritual life. I didn't have an abundance of toys, an abundance of even programmings. Like I was never put in programs unless they were free. And I had like a really, really good talent as a child of dancing. And I always wondered like if they would have invested in my skill set, might I have been a dancer at this, in this day and age?
Right, right. So your mom went to prison when how old were you?
2.5, 2.5, 3, because she was there for a year. And I was with my great grandmother in Camden, and we moved to Harlem when I was 4, going on 5.
Okay. It's interesting that you remember. Do you actually remember it, or is it people who have told you what happened?
Oddly enough, I remember the abuse incident with my hands being placed in the hot water. I don't remember the
Wait.
year. That's how I
What
was
abuse?
born. Okay,
Oh,
so when this was before my mother went to jail, when I was 2.5, there was a woman in the building who was an avid drug user. For some reason, I would never know to this day, and I probably will never know. My mother thought it was a good idea to have her babysit me, and her daughter abused me. The mother placed my hands in the hot water. I had skin grafts because my hands were burned very bad. I think I had second to 3rd degree. I was hospitalized for, I think, a few weeks.
wow.
Um,
Wow.
the mother punctured my eardrum, and I remember the daughter taking an iron to the right side of my outside calf.
Was
And
this one specific incident, or was this an ongoing?
no, this all like in one day because like how severe the burns were and needed to be hospitalized. So it was obvious she wasn't going
So
to send me back.
can you tell us about that day? Was it like and I mean, as much as you can remember, you're two and a
Like
half, so I don't
I
have
was
an
2.5 to
expectation that you
3,
remember a
but
whole lot.
it's amazing how either God showed me more in my memories or in a dream, or my memory was just that vivid because it was trauma based. So it really made a difference in my memory bank. And I remember having my hands under the hot water. I remember there was a mirror above the sink. It was a bathroom. The ear incident, I don't remember. I don't know if something was placed in there or maybe I was hit hard enough, but I do remember my eardrum is shot 30% to this day. I can never use a phone on this ear. When I use earbuds or headphones, I have to um, just rely on this one side, my left side. And I remember her daughter taking an iron and placing it to my ear. And I remember laughing. I remember it being on an ironing board first, waiting to get hot. It's amazing the things you can remember.
So your mom comes to pick you up after work or doing
That's
whatever
the
she was
thing.
doing.
I mean, after that, I don't know the other memories, but I do remember going to court and being in a court, going in a taxi to court. Another time, it was either early in the morning because it was still dark. I'm assuming to get there early, probably winter. Um, and being before a judge and me being on a stand. So I don't know if that had to do with what happened to me or trying to just have a positive case for my mother's because she didn't get a lot of time. She only got a year. Due to the nature of the crime, she really should have gotten a lot more time. But first time offender, a mother, she was a college student at Oswego State College. Before, so like leniency, I'm guessing mercy. The court gave her
So a
mercy.
lot happened in such a short period of time.
Not
So you're
even
being
5.
babysat by this woman who's involved
A
with drugs.
neighbor, a neighbor.
And then your mom gets arrested for, can you tell us what crime she committed?
Absolutely. She was a lookout for a robbery that actually wound up turning murder. Her and a gentleman who actually I learned later on in life was a boarder for my mother and her female partner. He lived with us at one time. They were plotting to rob a woman who lived across the street, and she always wore a lot of jewelry, which I guess led people to believe that she had money. And she was a lookout. They climbed up to her fire escape. The gentleman climbed up to her fire escape, and the woman panicked. Obviously, she saw him, she recognized him. She said, I know you. You live across the street. And he panicked and he murdered her. And he went to jail for much longer. And then my mother got time for being the lookout.
Wow.
So
So then you go live with your grandmother,
great grandmother in Camden.
great
Because my
grandmother. Okay.
grandmother and her lived up like on the same block. Like everything was so close knit. Like the crime happened in the building across the street. And then my grandmother lived up the hill. So I lived with my great grandmother in Camden, which is a good, drive and time away from the neighborhood and the environment and where my abuse happened and where the murder took place.
Okay. Then you spend a year with your grandmother, great grandmother,
Right.
and then you go back to your mom
When
and
she
then
got
have to
released,
relocate.
her and her partner took me. My mother's partner was not involved. She was actually in the military. She went to the army to try to make a life for us, for the three of us. And she heard them planning it and she told them, don't you dare, like that's insane, like that's crazy, that's diabolical, it's evil, like why would you try to do something like that? And they didn't listen, and she wasn't around, and they took the opportunity to do that. So
Um, So your mother was with her, it was a long-term relationship, your mom and her partner.
so that was about 12.
Okay.
That was about 12.
So she helped raise you, right?
That's like my
That's who
second
you,
mom. I consider
okay.
her my mother more than my biological mother. And I call my mother my biological mother because I don't refer to her as my mother for more
And
than
your mother's
many
still
reasons.
alive?
She's still alive and she still lives in Harlem.
Have you ever reconciled with her or?
Oh, um we've had in and outs with each other, and we haven't been speaking since 2017, but spring 2022, I tried to reach out just to give her some money to help because I knew like inflation was coming. I knew things were gonna get rough, and she rejected my handout. So I wasn't looking for a relationship. I just wanted to cover her. And I did the same thing with my mother-in-law. Like I put money to the side for both of them. And she said she didn't know that I was reaching out to her to bless her with money. She just thought I was assuming to reach out to rectify the relationship. But because she's a narcissist, I wouldn't want to do that. It's not safe for me, it's not safe for my family, it's not safe for my mental health. And she assumed that I wanted a relationship for her, and she rebuffed my advances. So we are where we are now, and all I can do is pray for her and pray that Jesus would touch her heart and change her because she has a lot. of wrongdoing that she's done. And it'd be nice to see that if not for me and the relationship of her grandchildren, that she would at least repent and just be in a better place so she could, ultimately have her soul saved, because it's been a very rough life for her, but she hasn't made the best choices in how to just overcome that and
So
just be
two
a
things
better
with
person.
that. Well, first of all, so you went back to live with her at about age 4 or 5, right? And you relocated. It was you, her, and her partner. Do you feel like the time away helped her rehabilitate at all? Was she still involved with drugs?
So
Like, was
that's
she a better mom after that?
so that's the funny part. The funny part is I don't remember the type of parent she was prior to her incarceration, but growing up, to me, outside of her just being very short-tempered, she was a good mother. She cooked for me, she cleaned, she was fine. But when she broke up with her partner and went with another partner, she basically checked out, so to speak. Like,
Mm,
she wasn't present as a mother. All she wanted to do was be with this person. She would leave me in the apartment with a boarder that she had, a male friend of his, and his son, who was like 21. You don't leave a teenage daughter, any child, with two men, no matter how long you've known them. And it was very rough. When I became an adult, like legal, once I left and moved out, that's when I saw the shift. That's when I saw that she was a narcissist, but before I had the words to know that's who she
that's
was.
what it was.
It was like, okay, you're an adult now, you're my competition. And not in a sense of um competition of, oh, you're an adult woman now, we're competing for the same type of men, because she's obviously her preference is women, or beauty, because my mother is not the most feminine woman, but in the sense of my intelligence. My intelligence has always been an issue for her. Gifted classes, reading at 3, great programs. The fact that I have a master's now and have advanced in life verbally kills her. Like, she can't stand it because she was limited. And she only got her associates.
Mm,
So it's made this
yeah.
rough
So it's
experience
interesting
of me
because in some ways you'd say she was a good mom, right? Like she did mom type things.
up until I was
Um,
an
but
adult.
then that relationship ended and almost her mothering ended based on what you're saying. Um, how did you how did you navigate motherhood? Were you afraid to become a mother? Having experienced what you experienced with your mom, or how did you ensure that you did not pass on those same um, experiences to your own children?
That's a good question. I guess it's just like the heart of God, because I knew what I wouldn't want to do. I'm not a drinker, I'm not a smoker. I was always a stay-at-home mom. I chose not to work to raise my boys. And it affected me in the long run, but they had more of me. Um, it was just, it was natural for me. And the to make matters worse, I was raised by my mother and her partner, and I told you that her partner was more of a mother figure to me. Even though my mother still did the motherly thing, she also, um, like I mentioned earlier, she was very quick with frustration, and sometimes that would extend to the corporal punishment. And my second mom, as I like to call her, would stop her and say, no, this is not how we do things. But oddly, I was raised by many women. So it was my mother, her partner, My grandmother had a hand in raising me. My great-grandmother had a hand in raising me. And then I have two twin aunts that were only 13 years old when I was born. And they too had a hand in raising me. And they all had something with them outside of my second mom that I didn't want to carry on. Like I didn't want to be like my twin aunts, as much as I love them, one of them used to always say to me the weirdest thing. I'm like 9, 10. I don't know how to do things, or you got to show me how to do things, right? And she used to always say to me, I need to learn how to cook and clean, or my husband will kick my. Like, how do you say this to a child and expect for them to internalize that and say, okay, well, I need to go out there and be the best mom and wife in order to avoid domestic violence. Like it's just so wild to me. My great grandmother adored me up until a certain point, in a story that I'll share maybe another time, or if we have time. And then my grandmother also, like they all loved me until I became a certain age. And it's just so weird how their love and their relationships with me was conditional. It's like they all experienced that in some way or something. I have no idea. No idea
Mm.
at all.
At what age would you say was the hardest time in your life?
13.
So tell us about year 13.
13 was when my mother started with the new partner, and there was so much in that. The woman would try to tell my mother how to discipline me worse than she was already doing. She started leaving me more at home with the two men who were boarders and spend time with her. She would come buy a little grocery for me and then go back with her. It got to the point where they were like physically um aggressive with one another. And one time I actually hurt the woman because she hurt my mom. So to defend my mother, I'm like hurting this woman. And then her daughter wanted to fight me. It was just like the wildest experience for any 13-year-old. And then the 21-year-old who lived with us, he was abusing me for like a year and a half, almost two, and then he stole my virginity. Like it was just really, really, really something like out of a Lifetime movie, if anybody would write anything that sinister. It was just really, really uncomfortable. But 13 is the age that sticks out for me.
So physical abuse,
Mental, sexual,
mental,
everything,
sexual.
neglect,
Did
everything
you
you
tell
can.
your mother that you were sexually abused? Did you tell anyone?
No, no. The signs were there, and she was busy. She was busy. She was busy living her life, starting, with this new lady. Um, and no one saw anything. Like the signs, they were obvious. My grades changed, my activities in school changed, and nothing there. But there was sexual abuse even before, like for many years by different individuals, including a female teenage neighbor. So there were many years where she had an opportunity to notice and say, wait a minute, something's going on. She's not doing this, she's not listening, and it was just like everyone was doing their own thing. And that's why, my old neighbor, says that we basically raised one another because we both were going through things by the same one of them was the same perpetrator. So everyone was just busy drinking, getting high, like it was still the 70s and there was the early 80s. And we suffered because of it.
The crack epidemic. So many people in our age group have similar stories, and it's very sad. It's very sad.
It is. It's
Um,
rough, but
but I think it also speaks volumes about um, transformation, right? And the power of God. Like a lot of people don't believe, and my podcast is not, a Christian podcast, but God is a major part of my life. So it's not something I can exclude, but it speaks to the power of God to know that you could have gone through all of these things and then
Right.
look at today.
And still believe.
Right.
And that, have the mindset of, well, if, he exists or if he's so good, then why did all of these things happen to me? So,
So tell me when things started to turn around for you because you have four boys, you have a husband, you know, life seems like it's pretty good right now. Tell me at what point did things start turning around?
the crazy part is things didn't start turning around for me till I was 32 years old, till I met my husband. We've been together since 2009. For basically 3 decades of my life, it was suffrage in one form or another, right? It was either growing up in poverty, growing up with parents who are incarcerated, growing up surrounded by drugs, going to school with teachers who really did not have the interest in you, so they wouldn't motivate you, they wouldn't recommend you for things, sexual abuse, physical abuse, psychological abuse. Um, you name it, the teenage years, and then being married to a narcissist at 20 and being 10 years with him and everything that pertained to that. Because it's like my mother and him, like it was like I was dealing with two narcissists at the same time
So
because
wait,
my
we
mother
missed the
did
whole decade. We missed the decade there.
it. Okay.
Um, so teen years with your mom. Did you graduate high school? Did you go to college? What did that look like?
No, I dropped out 16, 17, um, and was just out in the streets all the time. And then finally, out of my twin aunts, the other aunt that I'm closer to, sent me to Job Corps, and I was in there for 6 months and got kicked out of Job Corps. And then I went back with my mother. And then once I became like 19, things really started to change a little bit for the good, but it was still rough. I had someone who I was with. I lived with him and his mother. And because I had faced so much, even though he was a good person, I was horrible to him. I was abusive to him. I was extremely jealous for no reason. And through him, I experienced like a family life that I didn't have with my own. His grandparents were like my grandparents. His sister and his niece were like my family. And I was horrible. I was really, really horrible. And then we broke up and then I went back to my mother's house. And then at 20, I ended up getting married to someone I knew since a child. Um and we were together 10 years and he was a narcissist, he was abusive, he was damaging and then we broke up and then I lived on my own for about a year, almost a year and a half. And then I said, okay, you know what? Even though I'm living on my own, it's been a year and a half. I'm at a stage now where I want more for my kids. I was 3 hours away, and all my family and friends were in New York. I had lived in Johnson City, which is next to Binghamton. And I moved back with my mother, but I didn't know even then my mother was a narcissist. So I still didn't get it. We just had our falling outs, and I thought it was because of other issues.
Mhm.
And from May of that year to December of that year, like I started to see little things, and then things got worse and worse and worse. And then December of that year, we had an argument over something so silly. And she told me that me and my kids had to be out at the end of the month. And it was just
Wait, when did we have kids?
oh, the kids. Okay, so I had my kids with my first husband back 1998.
10-year relationship.
Mhm.
So how
to
old were you when you had your first child?
22,
Okay. You were
22.
married for 2 years. You had your first child. Um, you guys stayed together for the 10 years, and then you moved back home at like 30.
He left for a job transfer, and during that time period, it was the best time for me to um just break things off. I was getting stronger. I finally started working. The fact that I was a stay-at-home mom made it a lot more difficult for me to leave because I didn't have a good relationship with my family. I didn't have support. Everything was his family, his finances. So I finally started to work after the birth of my third child. Um, he was about 2 when I started working. And through that, since I lived upstate, things were so much more affordable than they are here. And I was able to work and do things. And I got the sense that he wanted out too. Like he wanted that time to, he figured he was moving back downstate with his mother. So that way, when he had a job transfer, he can do what he wanted to do. And I just wanted peace in my life. I wanted a healthy life for me and my kids. I didn't want what I was experiencing being married to a narcissist. And it was a smooth year and a half. Everything was great. I started doing all of the things that I was forbidden to do during my first you know, 10 years with him. And finally I broke it off. Things were great, but like I said, I wanted to get back to my family and friends. I was doing great financially. I was in school. I had become a rape crisis counselor. I had just finished doing an EMT basic certification training. I passed my practicals and the state exam. I was really excited, but I was alone. Like I didn't have um, my family and my friends, as flawed as our relationships were, like I still wanted that part of my life. And he was 3 hours away, so everything was flourishing, everything was great. And then the tough part was when I moved back with my mother within less than a year from May to December, especially once the fall came, I started to see things about her that made me know she had issues, but I still had never heard of the word narcissist or narcissism. I didn't know it applied to my own personal life, my mother, and then my ex-husband. And December that year, she said, and after our argument over the most silliest of things, a dish by the side of the bed, um, she said, you guys gotta leave. But I was paying her rent. I wasn't staying there for free. I was giving her my money to buy food. Like I was helping her out. And I was trying to figure out like what's the problem? There's something there, like, but she wouldn't discuss it. She was just saying you have to leave at the end of the month. And I was like, what do you mean leave at the end of the month? Like I'm paying you, I have nowhere to go. It's winter, it's Christmas time. I wouldn't get my tax refund, which would help me. And I was waiting on a 401k that I had gotten as a divorce settlement from my ex-husband, but that still didn't come. And I still couldn't get to the root of the problem. And finally, I said, all right, well, I'm not leaving until I have all my things in order. This is still my part. My name is on the lease. And then she admitted that she took my name off the lease um, without my knowledge when I betrayed her and moved. But I didn't think anything of it. And then the next day I go to work, I come home and I take a nap because I was just so tired. And she comes in and the police were behind her. And I'm looking at the police like, what's going on? And they're like, oh, we want to have a conversation with you. Conversation. I'm like, okay, like, what do you mean? So I go down to the second floor so my kids wouldn't eavesdrop from the hallway where in the third floor where we were. And they were saying that, oh, your mother wants us to have a talk with you. And I'm looking at the police like, since when are you involved in family matters where you come and have conversations with people, like in the role of a social worker? And in essence, they were there to um, intimidate me to move out with my kids. And, one officer was with her, the other officer was with me, and he was like, listen, I know how it is with mothers. Don't worry about it. Just, ignore it for a couple of days. Things would die down. She wasn't happy that was the end result. So while I went to work the next day, which is a Friday, she went to Safe Horizons, which is a domestic violence agency in New York City that helps domestic violence victims in court. And she lied to them and told them that I abused her and got an order of protection and forced me and my kids out on false pretenses. So, and I had to, at the time I was dating someone, so I stayed with him for a few weeks, but it wasn't working because my kids and his kids weren't getting along. But eventually I wound up in a New York City shelter with me and my kids for 7 weeks
7 weeks in a shelter with your kids. That's tough.
because grandma is a narcissist.
At this point, was she still with her other partner? The second
No,
partner?
no, they had broken up. She had been by herself for many, many years, and I assume it's because of a lot of her personal issues she hasn't addressed. And that the odd thing is, she's a therapist and a psychotherapist, but I don't think they're really helpful because she still is who she is.
All right. So, okay, you're in the shelter with your three kids. At this point, they're not being homeschooled yet. That didn't happen until
But that
later
didn't
on.
happen.
Okay. So, how are they adjusting?
Um,
This is a lot of shuffling
I,
around for the
I
kids.
honestly think they finally were at peace too, because there were things that were happening that I didn't find out about until later on when I wasn't around. Like my mother wouldn't allow them to get snack. She wouldn't allow them to take baths before bed. She would yell at them. She would allow the babysitter that I had to stay with them longer when her job was to pick them up when she got out of work so they could eat dinner together because I worked a late shift. And she was just horrible to them when I wasn't around, but no one ever told me because my 20-year-old was too young to articulate that. My eldest has autism, so he didn't process what was going on. And then in my middle child, her and him didn't have a good relationship because he could see what she was doing, but he was young too. He was 8 at the time. So how could he really come to me comfortably without fear of anything? Because that's grandma, that's my mother. And he probably thought deep down that I would side with her or I wouldn't believe him. Because these things will always happen when I was not around. I think they were at
It's
peace.
interesting that you say that your 23-year-old is still at home with you.
No,
And
he moved out. He
oh, so he's the one who moved out, and then your 20-year-old, the one who was too small to
25 and 20 are
understand.
still at home.
Okay, okay. Because I was gonna say it's interesting that he is still at home because maybe he has this fear of leaving because when mommy's not there, bad things happen. But good, I'm happy that he's on his own and navigating.
He's doing well. He's doing really.
So this is a lot. This is a lot to unpack.
There are things in between.
I'm sure there are. I am sure there are. So living in the shelters, I know definitely a difficult experience. How did you get out of the shelters?
Um, I got out of the shelter fast because one, that's just how God works. There are people that I know had been there for quite some time, and because my eldest son has autism and he was receiving Social Security income at that time, I received a voucher, and that's how we were only able to be there 7 weeks.
Hmm. Do the kids have a relationship with their father?
They do. They do. The older two more, the younger one, not so much. He was always closer with the older two than him. So, you know, that's the result of that, right? Like you favor, um, certain children over others, and it's gonna result in uh a deficit in a relationship.
So tell us how you got to where you are now, from the shelter to being an entrepreneur.
Ooh, okay. So 2009. So I moved into my apartment. Um, I was far. I was deep in Queens, Jamaica, Queens, but nobody would come. And I think that that was the goodness and the mindset of God, like having me be in a place where it's just me and the kids for a while. No friends coming over, no parties. I was never the type to have parties in my house, but just not the company, so that way we can adjust and we can just be. I spent the time, my 401k that I was waiting on finally came, and I used all of that money to beautifully decorate our apartment and make it home, make it a place for home, put some in savings, and take them out for activities, things we couldn't do because it was winter and we were in the shelter, right? So I met my husband that summer, um, and 2009, and then by September 2009, we started homeschooling because it was just really rough. Things started happening, things started changing. Um, and it was a lot easier for us to just as a family to take charge of our children's education, their safety, their livelihood, and not put stress on ourselves either traveling back and forth without a vehicle. Because they were in school still in Harlem, and one was actually in school downtown in Alphabet City. And we just started to homeschool, and we lived in our own little bubble for years, and it was amazing. We had the best time. And then I got pregnant in 2011. After that, we started saving money, and we knew we didn't want to stay in the city any longer. And God led us to New Jersey, and we've been here since 2012. We lived in Palisades Park first. Our kids, our older kids got back into school. I gave birth to our son in New York. We moved here when he was about 10 and a half weeks. And things have been little by little, doing great. I became an entrepreneur because of my husband. My husband has owned his own cleaning service for quite some time. And then I started working on the business with him um like 2017. So the first few years he was doing it on his own, and I was still raising the four now, acclimating to life in New Jersey, but pursuing my bachelor's and master's while I was home. So I still was doing something for me because I learned the hard way being a stay-at-home mom is just not it. And like I said, I was finally able to do all these things now that I was in my 30s, divorced, and just getting a sense of what do I have interest in? What am I good at? What is my purpose? And everything that I've done, even education wise, has all tied together without me realizing that it's the sole plan of God. And I started oddly enough, things were doing good. I graduated, went into my master's program. Things were going good. I graduated summer 19. Summer and 2019 was just a year. What many people think for them was 2020, 2019 was my 2020. It was my husband's 2020. It was the most insane year, intense. Um, I graduated December, and I said, okay, now I'm done. I'm done with my bachelor's, I'm done with my master's. I don't have an interest right now to go for PhD, and that's really not where my interests were. I needed a break. I had been in school for so many years. Um, and then I said, wait a minute. I need to do some trainings because I never had the opportunity to have any internships. Since I was an older student, those really weren't offered to me. Let me pursue some things on my own. So I did a New Jersey-based sexual violence advocacy training. I did, excuse me, some mental health trainings, first aid for adult and then youth. And then I was looking into a DV training in Bergen County, but I could never get in contact with the agency. And I was thinking, like, why? Well, what's like, there's a block there. I couldn't understand it, but later on I found out why. So, May comes, spring is here, summer's almost on the way. And I always am really good and just have an interest in going through my phone and reading the news. I love the news. And I learned about a story of a little girl who was murdered by her father. I'll spare people the details, but she was burned also like I was. And it set something off in me And she was in Queens also, so it wasn't like this happened in another country, like this happened in Queens. And I started to jump into action. And because I'm an activist and an advocate on other, parts of my life, I was like, we got to do something for her, because one of the things that stuck out was that the judge was not really listening to the mother when she had said, in this instance he was abusive, in that instance he was abusive. So obviously he got visitation unsupervised, which resulted in her death. And during that time, things started happening to me, but I didn't notice right away. My husband noticed a shift in me the moment I read that article. And the shift was, somehow what happened to me as a child, as a burn victim, resonated with her. Like it resonated with me, excuse me, what happened to her. And
Mhm.
it made me somehow reflect on my trauma. Like the body keeps the score. I don't know if you've heard of that book. Like it's true. Like the body does keep the score. And by May, the end of May, I started having really odd behaviors. It was the night of Memorial Day. And I said to my husband the next day, I have to go to emergency services. And he's thinking, oh, what's wrong? Your stomach, your back, your chest, like, and I said, no, like, I'm not right. And he was like, still like trying to figure out. And I went to emergency services for outpatient services in Westwood. Um, I sat before a counselor. I gave her a history, and at the time, she diagnosed me with PTSD, and it wasn't until I sat with someone else after I sat with them, because the outpatient, the emergency service is only for 4 weeks. And once I got transferred to a new setting, and I had more time to really um, go down the path of my life, she diagnosed me with bipolar disorder in addition to the PTSD. And I was having a really rough summer. It got worse because I refused medication. I wanted to just navigate it on my own. I didn't believe in medication for something like that. Um, and suicide ideation was extremely high. Um, I want to say it became like an obsession, a fascination. And then two things happened that shifted, and they were for the better. As horrible as they were. And the first was my husband's stepfather passed away. And when I saw how much pain my husband was in by losing him, I said, I can't do this. Because what I was doing was hurting him. And God forbid if I did end my life, he would be devastated. And then the second thing was Labor Day weekend, my husband was hit and run over by a car. And he had to be rushed to the hospital. He had emergency surgery, two emergency surgeries. He had a metal rod placed in his lower left um, leg. And those things just, like the first one woke me up. The second one was like, okay, now I got to take care of him, and I'm on the back burner. And I never looked back. And then 2020, we had um the pandemic. 2021, we were still in that. And then little by little things have changed. But um, the crazy part is I started my own business. I registered my own business January 2020. And then by March 2020, we were in lockdown. So for 8 months, I didn't do anything with my business because I had a product-based business and we didn't know how it was transferred. And I was in all these mom groups, and for the silliest things, they would say, you're spreading COVID. And that stuck in my mind. I said, oh my gosh, because I was getting a shirt from a supplier, and then I would send it to someone else to do this, to create this design for me. And like so many hands have changed. I can't wash these shirts and then put, they're not going to be new. Let me just stop. And it wasn't until my father's mother died that I said, I don't have any more time to waste. I've waited 8 months. I registered my business in 2020, January. I need to do something. And I just went and I launched. And it was huge because it came at a really good time where everybody was in the mindset of social justice, diversity, inclusion, and just trying to fight for one another. And obviously that's changed. And you know, it was a great ride, but I still felt like even when I had that business, it was like God was like you have to start this, you have to start
Something
this.
else. Yeah.
And
So we're almost out of time, but I
okay.
definitely want to schedule another day for you to come back and tell us some more.
Okay.
Um, but very quickly, I always like to ask before we sign off, what advice would you give to a young woman who is having a difficult time or may have been sexually abused or psychologically or physically abused? You know, what advice would you give to a young woman right now who's struggling?
For me, the first thing is to pray about it. Um, for you to, for you to just have that reliance. The second is to find a safe person, whether that is a professional, a family member, someone to just help you unload, unpack. Um, and if you can afford it, if you're comfortable with it, um, start the process of therapy. Therapy has been extremely bene beneficial for me. It has been the one thing that's helped me see things and just navigate from being a, having the mindset of being a victim to a survivor. You really, I can't say enough about therapy. And if you're uncomfortable with the therapist, you can always change. There's nothing that ties you to a therapist that you may not appreciate their approach, their style, or you're just not comfortable with.
Powerful story. You have a you have a lot to be thankful for.
I do. I do.
I'm I'm so happy for you that
Thank
your life
you.
has turned around
Thank you.
um, because you don't look like what you've been through. And thank God for that.
Thank God for that. Definitely.
So, Allison, thank you again. I definitely have to have you back because I feel like there's so much more that I wanted to ask and that you wanted to share. So, definitely want to arrange some time for us to be together again. But I have to tell you, thank you. I know so
Oh,
many of our
thank
listeners are going to be moved by your story. So, thank you so much for sharing with us today.
you. Thank you so much.
To our listeners, thank you for being with us. Please definitely tune in next week for another episode of Women in Leadership. May your hearts be filled with the brightest of sunflowers, even on the cloudiest of days. Wishing you love and positive vibes. Until next time.